Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reconnection. Today, we're going to talk about winter, and we're going to do so by kind of recapping the episodes we've done so far and pulling pieces of advice that we've given surrounding those topics that might apply to the winter season, giving some advice on practices you can maybe take part in, herbalism that we both specialize in, and different practices in general that might carry you through the season, whether you're in a spot that experiences true winter with the cold or just a spot that has winter vibes. We'd like to give you all the advice there. So, Lynn, my first question for you actually is, especially coming from like California, did you have like winter practices or a winter change or the winter feels, or did it just feel like another season for you?
That's a good question. I think as a Californian, growing up there and, like just being in California, it's interesting because you get so much of that sunny weather, but you do feel a shift. And I don't know if it's just that, like, I'm sensitive to it and sensitive to the cold because, I'm a Californian, but you do feel a shift on some level. Um, I definitely feel like different parts of California get colder than others, like San Diego. I feel like sometimes that doesn't happen. But in different parts, like Northern California, like Monterey or like along the coast, definitely gets that colder weather. But energetically, I think things change. I think you start to feel like a transitional shift on some level. And I think I love highlighting that there's a phase between seasons, which in Chinese medicine, we say it's the earth phase. And that phase is sort of like the pivot between spring and summer or fall and winter. And that phase is something I've been focusing on a lot this year. And so I've been focusing on the shift between fall and winter. And you can really feel it when you're sensitive to it. Like it's just this period of like kind of limbo state. Like you don't really know if it's fall anymore and you don't really know if it's winter. And I feel like we're kind of in that state right now
Yeah.
because we haven't hit the winter solstice yet. But I feel like that time is really like pivotal. It's transformational, and you can really feel that energy. Like there's an internal shift that happens, and there's also like changes that happen like naturally, like things want to transform, like things want to kind of like die off or fizzle away, or you start to feel like you want to use your energy and your chi differently. So I want to pass this question
Yeah.
back to you, Jordan. Do you feel the shifts? How do you perceive and receive winter?
Yeah, no, and I think the best word for what you're trying to describe for those changes, the like birth phases, there's almost like a sense of like timelessness to it. It's like, where am
Mm,
I? When am I? It's just like there's a very big timelessness to it. And I come from upstate New York, where the changes of seasons are very drastic and very dramatic and very like textbook, if you will. And that being said, winter actually drags out a little bit longer than most people would like to, but you definitely it taught me so much about Chinese medicine, honestly, and it taught me so much
mm,
about how to care for the body because it is getting cold, it is getting dark. You have to rest. You have to kind of get cozy. You have to slow down. Like you're being forced to do these things because the weather is literally making you do so. And I think it's a great reminder though, because rest and restoration is things that we actually need. And I think when my husband and I went to California for schooling for the 3 years that I was there, that was the hardest part about winter because yes, it got darker a little bit earlier, and yes, it was a little bit cooler, but it was still sunny outside every single day. So it was like,
mhm,
oh, I have to go in too. I have to go outside. I have to be productive because that sun was the reminder for us because we don't see it during the winter as much. So we have the excuse to
mhm.
kind of rest and relax. But since I was in California and seeing the sun every time, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go. And so I definitely think that um, your environment obviously does inform you quite a bit. Although after being in San Diego for a few years, you did start to feel the subtle energies, and I did start to feel the shift of the slowing down, and it also gave
Mhm,
myself permission to do so. And I found it very interesting because seasonal depression is such a common thing in New York State. So when I went to San Diego, I was like, it's sunny all the time. There's no way that's going to exist or be a thing. But I saw during the winter a lot of patients in San Diego suffering from seasonal depression. And it kind of blew
mhm.
my mind because we rationalize it as, oh, it's because we don't see the sun here. Oh, because it's cold. And like both of those things were still happening there. So I think there really is
Yep.
just a natural drop in the overall energy that's existing. That if you're sensitive to that drop, it might take your legs out a little bit and kind of bring you into those spaces. Um, Kind of talking about, shifting to like the actual time of the year, because we're obviously still a little premature. December 21st, most of us forget, especially if you're in New York, when it starts snowing in November, is actually the
Mhm.
official start of winter. And of course, most of the major religions have a holiday surrounding this time. And I think that
Mhm.
the original purpose of this was because it was getting dark and getting cold. It was almost this time to come together, and to rest and to restore. I mean, holiday by definition was meant to be a day off. It was meant to be a day to kind of go in a bit. And I think
Mhm.
that this, what saddens me the most is that a lot of holiday now, and no shame on any of this, but a lot of holiday now is like getting a bunch of shit done. It's getting drunk. It's like overdoing. It's like all of these things that,
It's buying things.
yes, and
Yeah.
it just feels like it's just taxing yourself even further, that it's really taking away the purpose of this time of the year, which was meant to rest and relax and restore. And I think that that's kind of
Right.
why we're this in this perpetual burnout. But kind
Mhm.
of moving into that, talking about that time of year, what do you I actually don't know the answer for this. What was your holiday tradition? I know you obviously were raised in American traditions. Where you get
Yeah.
did you do Christmas and things along that time? And what was your December looking like?
Yeah, I love this question. When I grew up in a Vietnamese Chinese family, and so I had that culture very much like at home. And then when I would leave the house, it was like I was an American kid, you know?
Yeah.
And so the collectively, when I was living in California, there was Thanksgiving, there was Christmas, but when I would go back at home, we wouldn't celebrate Thanksgiving. It would just be like a normal day
So
in our
weird.
household, you know? And so we would see everyone else outside of us celebrating that, but we would never, like, I never grew up like making a turkey and doing all the things. Like, you know what was our tradition though? Was going out and getting Asian food and dim sum and like going to all the Asian markets, because most of the Asian people never celebrated like Thanksgiving. They all just like stayed open and it was just another day. So I never perceived it like that until maybe like later on, until like I went to other Thanksgivings and Friendsgivings and things like that. Um, but I did start to shift that like relationship with that holiday because of the true deeper like significance behind it.
Right.
And I didn't resonate with that, right? Because of the Native Americans and all of these things that kind of, it's really about, it's not what it's meant to be for.
Yeah,
Like, and I
there's a
think that,
shadow there. There's a shadow there.
yes, there is definitely a shadow there. And I think that gratitude is something that can happen any other day and not just one day. And so I think that that holiday has just been like really, in many ways, in the United States culture, highly emphasized. But in my family, it wasn't. Was it for you?
Yeah, no, it was, and it's ironic too, because you just made me really like spark an idea that, like, ironically, that it's supposed to be a day of gratitude, but it's also a day
Hmm.
where you're overly indulging. And I guess I could
For
kind of
sure.
see like a comparison there. But I think that like with all these holidays, they've been really pulled from their roots of what they were meant to be. And let's say that it
For
was
sure.
truly just meant to be a time of gratitude. I don't know
Hmm.
anyone who really truly like goes around the table and says you're grateful anymore. Some people make a social
Yeah.
media post, and as much as I want to hate on social media, that's kind of nice that people are still at least doing that, like putting what they're grateful
Right.
on their page. Like that's kind of cool. At least we're kind of sticking with it in some
Hmm.
aspects there. But it was definitely a time of the year for me that kicked off the holiday season, as it did with most Americans. Of course, it was a time off from school, so everyone loved that aspect and facet of it. But I definitely think
Yep.
that it was, I think with most holidays, it was incredibly, incredibly trivialized. Like, you don't
Right.
realize growing up as American how, when you see other cultures celebrating a holiday, and don't get me wrong, a lot of it is stripped from the roots, but you see other cultures celebrate a holiday and feel the depths and feel the connection and feel the tradition that goes back generations that they can trace. It's like none of our
Hmm.
holidays had that resonance to it. There were
Yeah.
holidays that sometimes, like, you at least had the connection to your grandparents. That was like a generation back at least, but it still felt a sense of hollowness I don't think you realized until you got older. Because when you were a kid, the flashy lights, the food, the presents, things like that can kind of, keep you mesmerized for long enough. But I think that's why when you
Hmm.
go into your teens and you're like early 20s and stuff like that, that's what that time of year feels so depressing. because I think that you
Mhm.
realize that the magic was kind of a facade and it wasn't deeply rooted and it did lack all of these things. I think it's kind of
Right.
waking up from like the rose colored glasses and being like, oh shit. And then we
Mm.
kind of talked about how Thanksgiving, how it came to be, and we don't need to go into its roots there. But I think even
Right.
Christmas is one of those things that needs to be digested as well, because as most people know, and I'm that person at the holiday dinner that will have the conversation, is that Christmas itself, um, especially for the date being chosen December 25th, was mainly for an overshadowing of these traditions. There's no record of Jesus being born in December. That was kind of just the easiest place to put that narrative as an overlay, because there were pagan
Mhm.
holidays like Yule. There were other traditions being celebrated at that time. So it was almost
Mhm.
like the marketing scheme, like let's throw it in where everything else is going. And that's also, I kind of
Mhm.
think, where some of that magic is, lost and pulled from. But
Yeah.
I will say one thing that I wonder if you ever heard this allegory, because I always am amazed by symbolism, because Yule is the shortest day of the year, so it's obviously when we have the least amount of daylight. And I've heard this allegory that one of the reasons why Jesus in this story may have been overlaid during that time was because we say that it was the birth of Jesus, and we say Jesus is
Mhm.
like the sun allegory. We say he's like we all often perpetuate as a Leo, which I'll take that narrative. But anyhow, but
Mhm.
he's been given that allegory and that narrative. So it's believed that the reason why they overlaid Christmas on Yule was because it was the beginning of days getting longer. It was the birth of the
Mhm.
sun. Have you ever heard that
True.
allegory before? And if so, is that curious to you?
Yeah, I have. I actually have heard that, and I think I like to think about it as in terms of, like, yin and yang, because
Mm,
and this kinda
yeah,
relates us to more of, like,
perfect.
the deeper things that we're gonna dive
Yeah.
into and relate it back to, which is winter season, or the water element within Chinese medicine, is very much the time of yin. And so when fall starts, that's like the beginning of yin growing after summer, which is super yang time. So once summer is done, yang is like at its utmost peak, and then it drops. And that's when yin begins to grow, which is fall. But then once winter starts, that's when yin is at its like highest peak. That's when the nights are the longest, and that's when you have shorter days and things like this. And that's also, I feel like the collective energy starts to change around. And what I love you highlighted was like we are so influenced by our environment and the collective energies around us, is that like once other people and once kind of the sun shifts, your energy starts to go more inwards. You start to become more yin. And so I think that day of the 25th is very much like when yin is at its like very highest peak. And once it's at its highest peak, it begins to drop, and that's when yang comes back. Yang is
Mm,
also representative of the sun. So
masculine
yang, the
energy.
light, the sun, the masculine energy, right? Like the energy to kind of like spark the fire again, which is like the beginning of spring. So I sort of relate
Mm.
it to that. What do you think?
I've never seen. I'm so happy you overlaid the Chinese medicine, because I have the background of course, the Catholicism aspect, and I have the background
Mhm.
of the more pagan holiday of Yule and things along those lines. But it's so crazy how the
Mhm.
Chinese medicine fits overlays perfectly over it. And I'm going to
Yeah.
extrapolate that even further to the end of winter, where we have Easter, or known as Ostara in other areas. It's that
Mhm.
exact same concept. We have, the rebirth of Christ, but it also could symbolize the rebirth of Yang. It's when yang is
Yep.
finally becoming higher than yin again when springtime
Mhm.
comes about. So it's like the amount of analogies and allegories that were always implemented and can seen across all cultural lines here. It's just
Yeah.
mind blowing. Again, we just had the
Sure.
Catholicism here. We had the Chinese medicine aspect of it. We have some of these pagan holidays coming out of Europe and areas like that. And it's so cool how
Mhm.
they're all saying the same thing with different symbolism.
Yeah, I also wanna give another analogy to this too, and just relate it back to the body and, like, the menstrual cycle, because our menstrual cycle is also, like, our infradian rhythm, is in itself a microcosm of the seasons. And so,
Mm.
like, when you are beginning your, let's just say if you're somebody who has a uterus, who has a menstrual cycle, once you start your menses, that is, like, the day of winter, like, that is your winter season beginning.
Mm.
And so once that happens, that's sort of like your ultimate yin time. And then once you get to follicular, that's when the yang comes back, the light comes
Mm.
back, the all the testosterone comes back, right? So like your hormones begin to shift. I also think on another level, when we're talking about collective energy shifts and biorhythm shifts, we're also talking about hormones, because what helps us shift internally like so profoundly, it's our hormones, it's our circadian rhythm. So like, we are beings that live according to the sun and the moon, so we are of course going to shift in many different ways because those energies are always shifting.
Well,
So
it's so
yeah.
interesting too because I didn't even think to add this aspect is you just brought the feminine aspect into it, but then from the masculine perspective, testosterone is actually
Mhm.
lowest at the beginning of winter, which is so crazy
Yep.
because it fits into this conceptualization as well that it is the
Yes.
most yin time because in men testosterone is very masculine and it's at its lowest during this time. And I think this is a
Mhm.
perfect tie-in for anyone who does have any basis within the Chinese medicine. So winter is representative of the kidneys and urinary bladder. It's attached to the element of water. And we can, of course, see
Mhm.
that with in areas where it snows. It's usually very wet and snowy during this time of the year. And we
Mhm.
also look in Chinese medicine at the kidneys and the urinary bladder, the water system as a whole, as kind of our hormonal axis as far as sexual hormones go. So that's kind of how it ties into what we're just
Right.
conversating about there. And I think that that also can then all of us lead into the let's go into the taste. The taste of the time of year is salt. So
Mhm.
salt is associated with these systems. And we can obviously see with the kidneys and urinary bladder, that direct association. We can also see that during
Mhm.
this times of the year, we would usually be consuming stored foods, and those foods would therefore be salty. So during this time of the year, it is important to watch your salt intake, whether it's too low or too high. Of course, it's always a balance there. And I think
Mhm.
that this is a great question then, kind of getting into the Chinese medicine, getting into the kidneys, getting into the urinary bladder. What is your favorite herb for this system as a whole? And I hope you
Mhm.
don't steal mine, so I'll let you ask.
You know, I love that you introduced food, because I think food is our ultimate medicine before herbal medicine. It's the medicine you take 3 times, 2 times a day. So it's really important, the energy in which you eat food, the energy of your food, the quality of your food, all those things. During this time, what I really love, and personally, this is from my own personal experience and also what I've shared with my own clients, is you want to eat according to the rhythms and the seasonal shifts around you, of course, right? And so if the weather is colder, then of course your body sort of wants to offset that and wants to eat more yang food. So I'm thinking soups and
Mm,
broths, things like that. And then I love that you mentioned salty being the flavor that's associated with the kidneys and water element, so the winter time. So one thing that I love that I learned about in Western and Eastern nutrition that we had to take, which was, you can eat, if you actually eat the food of the time, that actually in some ways can weaken and strengthen that organ system. But
mm,
oftentimes we kind of overdo it with salty foods. Like
yeah.
most foods are like super salty and savory, right? Most foods are super sweet in nature, or they're overly sweetened and things. But one thing that we can do is actually offset it by the other organ systems or the other elements that that element is connected to.
Mm,
So, for example, we would say in Chinese medicine that metal is the mother of water. So, the energy of metal, which is associated to foods that are acrid and pungent, and things like garlic and ginger and things like this, are really great herbs to start to implement into your foods to kind of warm up the body, to give more energy to the kidneys, the water element. And then if you feel like you're also eating too much salty foods, I know I'm that person that eats like too much salty food. You can actually eat more sweet foods that are in nature. So like dates, honey, and things like that are like naturally sweet, because that is going to actually offset and sort of help to regulate the saltiness of the foods that you're eating, because there is a relationship between the earth element and the water element, in that we say it controls, so it sort of regulates the energy of the water element. So if you eat too much salty foods, it can kind of imbalance the water, either like too excessive or too deficient. And then if you have and incorporate like that sweet food, the dates and the honey and things, it can help to kind of regulate that imbalance. So that's sort of my thinking in terms of like herbology and foods and things. So my herbs were ginger. I love turmeric as well. It's a very warming food that also helps to like move chi, move blood. I love green onions, like, and using the bottom of the green onion bulb is amazing. I love putting that in my soups. It's the best. It's also great for immunity, which is oftentimes like the winter time is the time when you want to boost your immunity. People get sick a lot, people get colds and flus and things. So that's a really great herb to add into your foods. And just incorporating more yang foods, especially if you're in a place that's colder and has snow. Warming up your body with teas and broths and things can keep your energy strong throughout the winter season.
No, I really appreciate that, and it's funny because I obviously, knowing Chinese medicine as well, know everything you just said, but I think you like delivered that in a very good fashion. And I know that metal breeds water, but I guess I never thought about the fact of how perfect is that metal is spicy, and spicy is like the best flavor to be having during the water season. Like the more the cycle is so freaking simple, but the more you understand the generation cycle in Chinese medicine
Yeah,
of the five elements, it can be overlaid into any principle in your life and just make
everything.
so much sense. So I love that. And also with we saying so the metal creates water, but we also say that earth controls water. And I think that is also a perfect example because that's why salty and sweet are always paired together because there is this give and take to those paradigms. And another good example of sweet, which I don't normally necessarily think of this as being sweet, but like even something like meat is technically considered sweet, certain meats, and then rice is considered sweet. And that can be really regulating to the salty flavor. So it's very interesting that you have had brought both of those things in. And I think from a Chinese medicine perspective, all those things you just recommended are great. And so other practices that I'm just going to throw on is, of course, moxa would be a great herb for this time of the year, actually the burning of it, because it can be very, very warming to the body. I always recommend people, if you can't do like a full body soak during this time of year, at least soaking your feet in hot water, warm the kidney channel that we're talking about. It starts at the bottom of the foot, so you can add warmth to that. If you have any basis in herbalism, you can throw some herbs in that water, but just pure water with some salts or pure water by itself what could work greatly there. So those are some good recommendations. And then the other thing that I recommend is just warmth in general. So whether it be a heating pad or any something you throw in the microwave to warm up, I recommend getting warmth to your body as much as possible. And another area other than the feet I recommend is warming the low back because again the kidneys reside there and it's a very important part of your body to keep warm. And I think something else that Chinese culture has taught me is this is the time of the year of cold feet, to say the least. So always keeping double socks and slippers on the house. You do not need your feet on that bare cold ground because that allows cold into the system and the kidneys do
Yeah.
not like that. So let's avoid that as much as possible. So I think that actually really encapsulates the Chinese medicine of things and to not take too much time because we have an entire episode on that people can pull from. Let's kind of like
Yep.
quickly recap the astrology of this time of the year. So
Mm.
winter starts the 21st. That is the beginning of Capricorn season. Capricorn is kind of taking all the light right now because there's a lot going on in those. So I think what would be best for me is for us to conceptualize right now with the big three of winter, kind of just recapping how to embody them again. So with Capricorn, my
Mm.
brain instantly goes to it's a very planning, methodical, structured archetype. I think that's a great for this time of the year because we do have the holiday season. It gives us some time to reflect. We have New Year's resolutions, which gives us time to think about what we want to bring into the next year. And the only thing I want to overlay on that is because this is wintertime where we have rest and relaxation, do not execute too many of your New Year's plans during the new year. Wait until springtime. Allow your body to rest on them and let them to percolate. Allow yourself to think about them. Executing too many of these things during the winter could lead to burnout. So that kind of covers Capricorn. What are your thoughts of the other big three and how to kind of emulate them as we go through the winter season?
Yeah, I love this question. Because I think my brain works so much in astrology. Like I just see the world, I'm like, that's so
It's,
Aquarian or
it's, it's
that's so
another pattern,
Pisces.
just like the five elements. You can overlay over anything.
Totally, totally. So Capricorn for me, this time really feels like a time of it really feels like a time of connecting with something that's so much deeper than you. I think of legacy and I think of ancestry during this time because I feel like there's sort of a sacredness towards coming back home, coming back into the hearth, coming back into the heart, right? And kind of reviewing your resources and kind of conserving your energy. I think there's so much to that, that is connected to our own health, but that's connected to our own legacy in many ways. And so one thing that I was thinking of when we were talking about Chinese medicine was during this time of winter season, during actually any of the seasons and the associated element, that organ system, the predominant organ system, can actually be very highlighted during this time. And that can tell you a lot about that system. So during this time, the kidneys, which represents our stress system, during this time, during winter element, it's a good time that tells you a lot of information about your kidneys and what state your kidneys are in. So oftentimes people can come in and just feel really tired because throughout the year they've been really using their kidneys. They've been using a lot of their kidney energy. And so I think during Capricorn time, you can start to kind of face some truths about how hard you've been working, how much you've been pushing, the purpose and the legacy that you're creating. A lot of those truths can kind of come to the surface. I feel there's a lot of that. And also at the same time, it coincides with the holidays. Part of that is taking stock of how much have you been doing, what state you're in, how your kidney chi is doing, right? How much you're giving back to yourself and also giving to others. And at the same time, another part of it is resting and enjoying and just being with people that you love and like creating those moments that are really special that we remember. You remember the holidays, you remember these times of the year because you get to connect with family and get to connect with friends that you haven't seen in a long time. So to me, that's very much like Capricorn and kind of taking stock, reviewing, getting ready for the next year. And then you start into the next year with Capricorn, and then you go into Aquarius, which is so much. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna pass it to you because I feel like I have so much to say about
you're
Aquarius.
good.
And
I actually, Aquarius, ironically, because it's our opposite to Leo, I feel like it's so hard for me to grasp for that reason alone. But the more I think about it, especially since we're said to be stepping into the age of it, I've been trying to understand, digest it more. And I think Aquarius is the higher mind, its idea, its thoughts, it's this percolating of concepts. And I think that that's what's so representative of that time of the year is we're still we're in the middle of winter now, being in late January, mid-February. And I think that the reason why that time is so thought-provoking, because we're supposed to be resting, going inward, taking this downtime to see what comes out of our psyche, to see what we can come up with, to see what things we can put together and design. But again, this is without that much action. It's more staying in the mental realm of things, taking note of what these things are. And that's why Aquarius is also associated with technology and advancements, because it's when these things can be conceived of. So I think that time of the year then from the end of January to February, there is just such a great time to contemplate. But again, staying in that contemplation and doing your hardest to not overly execute and overly burn yourself out, because it is meant to be a time of rest. How else do you see Aquarius there?
That's so air sign of you, because it's interesting because Aquarius is an air sign, but it's also called traditionally the water bearer. So you're right in that it's in some ways collective energetics. The collective universal energy is pouring water. It's sort of channeling information to all of these different points. And during this time, it's very possible to receive new ideas and images and like innovations for the future and all these things. It's a really interesting time. I like to look at the signs in the lens of the ruling planets. So Capricorn and Aquarius are ruled by Saturn. And if you think about Saturn, the ruling planet gives it its flavor. Signs themselves are sort of the qualities. It's the energetic ways that it's going to be manifesting, the qualities, the personality, right? But then Saturn, or its planet, is going to kind of give it its power. It's going to give it its battery, essentially. So Aquarius and Capricorn are powered by Saturn. So think about Saturn as a planet that's about discipline, and it's about teaching lessons. It's about facing hard realities, and it's also about taking stock and also receiving the reward, receiving these new ideas and these new collaborations, new connections and things. So I think during that time too, between Capricorn and Aquarius, it is a time of fertility, receiving information, receiving new ideas and things. And I always feel like during this time, it feels like you can feel an ending of a cycle. You know, I always feel that. Maybe it's just because in the Gregorian calendar, we're entering into a new year. You always feel shifting of a cycle, but at the same time, you're at the very tail end of the astrological cycle. So you are in this deep kind of dark night of the soul, which is the wintertime tunnel, and then you see the light once we're about to enter into Aries or into the springtime.
Yeah.
And so I think that time is really interesting, and that brings us into Pisces, which I feel Pisces is an energy of like the womb space because it encompasses everything and it's sort of a sponge, and it has no boundaries.
That must be, sorry to cut you off there, but
Yeah.
I'm glad, I'm going to let you finish, but that makes so much sense. You just said it's like the womb space and all those things, because
Mhm.
I hate Pisces so much and I always reject my feminine. So this is definitely coming full circle. So thank you for that, but continue.
Yeah. I think it's just because I'm so drawn to the feminine and the sacred feminine that I see so much of patterns of the world through that
Yeah.
lens. But when I think about Pisces, I really, again, back it by Neptune, which is its ruling planet. And so Neptune is very much the planet of spirituality and dreams and fantasies and art and creativity, and it's just everything. You know, it's like the fluffy and the unicorns all mixing in one melting pot.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's really, really overwhelming. I remember on some new moons and full moons of Pisces, like it would be so overwhelming because I never understood Pisces either until I actually started embodying more of Virgo, which is its opposite energy. Because then it teaches you those two opposite signs teach you a lot about each other. And so Pisces is very much the opposite of Virgo. It's the no boundaries. Sometimes it's inefficient. Being in a dream state and daydreaming all the time is not efficient, right? But yet that is what sparks and gives life to Pisces. It's that time of the dream, deep dreaming, deep, and sometimes deep illusion, right? I think during that time, which is like February to March, it's sort of like we can kind of become thrown out of our illusion,
It's like a
or maybe
fever
thrown
dream.
into a new reality in some ways. And then that takes us into spring, which is the awakening of yang. So I think yin in itself, yin energy, the end of the year is very yin in nature. And if you think about it, it overlays with winter, which is yin. But like Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces just feels very yin time. And yin represents darkness. It represents the shadow self as well. During this time, there could be a lot of like shadow work being done, deepening into your own psyche and your own process, I think, too. So I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yeah, quick,
What do
just
you
yeah,
feel?
just to kind of quickly recap that, then all of those three of those had this very contemplative, no space almost. It was this very much so this place of thought, the immaterial, the imagination. And that's why this time of the year, then I therefore believe it's great to stay in that resting and restorative state, because well, resting is when we dream, it's when we can contemplate, it's when new ideas can come in. And that's what all of these represent. And I think the one last thing I want to throw on top of that is I also forget that Aquarius has that aspect of community to it, the water bearer, the giving, because you also see that winter, for many reasons, is a very time that was meant to be of giving. So that energy is kind of in there too. A lot of people will volunteer for the first time kind of during the holiday seasons, during this time of the year. So there's also
Right.
that aspect to it too, because Saturn has discipline, and I see giving as a form of discipline, to volunteer, to give back, and then that also can reap rewards in several ways to give. So I think all those things feel very all inclusive there. And I think to kind of
Yeah.
just like wrap the conversation up, because we did very well kind of touch basing on everything that we've spoken of here today. I
Yeah.
think that I would like to end with, our classic a little piece of advice. And I guess I will go first there. I think the biggest thing with winter is clearing expectations, because I think the
Mm.
biggest thing with going into a time that's meant to be resting and restorative, if you go in with a plan that's already not resting and being restorative. So it's clearing expectations. It's going in with making as much space as you possibly can. I know we all live busy lives, but trying to find an hour a day a week, find these times to truly rest and find that restoration, and allowing
Mhm.
yourself to slow down. And I know that we're already
Mm.
into the winter season, but how we can prepare for winters then to come is use the time of summer and the fall where you still have that energy to allow yourself to have that spaciousness towards winter. I know we no
Yeah.
longer have to go searching for food or store all these things, but treat summer and fall like our ancestors did and take those times
Mm.
to prepare for winter so winter can be a restful and restorative time, even though we do have the conveniences of modern society behind us, and we can also utilize them to then be more restorative. So I'm going to throw it back to you. Was there anything we didn't touch base on? I know you love herbs, you love food, you love astrology, so we kind of hit most of the things. But
Yeah.
is there any last piece of advice for the winter season?
I think you summarized it perfectly. I love what you said. The one thing I do want to say and highlight of what you said was align with the slowness, align with the presence, align with the yin. And that means just being a little bit more softer with yourself and your life and your daily things. Just going a little bit, even if you go like 2%, a little bit more slower. That's moving and aligning with the energetics of the winter season of yin. And that would be my only thing, was just adopt more yin into your life, because that in many ways helps us to slow down and become more present and receive life more. When we're going 100 miles per hour, it's hard to sometimes take in the beauty that's around us. Go into more yin.
Well, and I
Yes.
think that I'll kind of end on here what I'm doing right now personally, and I have cut back dramatically on caffeine, and I didn't intend for it to
Mm,
be this time of the year, but it has fit so perfectly as an overlay because it's allowing me to enter into slowness. Time is seeming to slow down because
mhm.
I'm not constantly stimulated, and
Yeah.
it feels like I'm finally able to embody those principles that you really can't understand when your physical body is in overdrive in that capacity. So I would also like to end saying that we do have an episode on the divine feminine. I think that'd be a great thing to check out right now as far as better
Mhm,
understanding these ideas and principles, because we do say that winter is a feminine time of the year. And we'll definitely
mhm.
be coming back to recap seasons in the future, and just like to thank everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.